All right, hello everyone. It's about time to get started. So if everyone would sit down, we'll get going. So first, I have a few announcements to make. Firstly, if you want to sign up for our email list, there's a QR code over at the door that you can scan and you can get on our email list. Also, if you want to become a member, just talk to one of the officers. That'll be me or Will over there and Matt back in the back. And the one other announcement we have right now is that we will be having elections for our officer positions later this semester. So if you want to become an officer, talk to one of these staff members. And we'll be having Will Johnson speak tonight on the problem of evil. But first, we have Adam here to talk about his evangelism class.
One thing that we wanted to do this summer is offer a class on how to share the gospel. In other words, how to encourage somebody in conversation to trust in Jesus Christ as their Savior. So you might have tried to do that in the past. You might have tried to share the gospel with a friend or even a stranger and found it difficult, and it can be. That's why we put a class together for this. One of my roles as a local church pastor before I stepped down to do Ratio Christi was an evangelism pastor. So I've got a class prepared that I would like to take folks through, and we wanted to offer that to Ratio Christi students or anybody who's interested this semester. So if you want to be a part of that, come and talk to me afterwards. I want to see who's interested first. So far we have 4 or 5, but I want to see who's interested first, and then we can figure out a time to meet, whether that be Saturday morning, Tuesday night, Sunday afternoon. We can figure that out. Probably be 5 to 6 weeks is what I'm thinking. Another possibility is to do it over the summer as well when people have more time. But regardless, just come and chat with me afterwards if that's something that you're interested in.
All righty. Well, good evening. First, I wanted to go over, like Zach said earlier, some of the elections coming up. So these are some of the different responsibilities and positions we're looking to cover and fill. So if you're interested in any of these, like you said, talk to any of us, and we will let you know about that. And then also, this is just some of the expectations we have for officers. If you are interested, obviously we'll be able to talk to you more about that then as well. My name is Will Johnson. I serve as the vice president here. I muted it already. I serve as the vice president here at Ratio Christi UNL. So while in previous weeks, my fellow Ratio Christi members have done a stellar job at providing arguments and reasoning for why God does exist, tonight I have been given both the privilege and the burden of discussing what is, in my opinion, one of the most powerful arguments against theism. This argument is most commonly referred to as the problem of evil. First of all, why is this issue important to address? Well, I believe it is one of the main critiques of theism that I personally have witnessed on a regular basis and can lead many away from a belief in God. It is also a very deeply emotional and sensitive topic, which can often be the hardest to address rationally. However, it is still important to tackle issues like this and to try to evaluate our theistic position without the lens of emotion that could be warping some of our reasoning. And finally, the idea of evil, God and evil coexisting can make a lot of people very uncomfortable. And being a theist trying to defend the existence of God while so much suffering in this world still exists can seem like a daunting task that would be easier to just avoid. It can be tempting to focus on the stronger, logical points of theism and avoid critiques like this in order to have a stronger position. However, this is a huge mistake, and in the long run only makes our position look flimsier. Powerful contradictions must be addressed and thought through in order to have a consistent worldview. So there are 2 main arguments that people will often bring up when talking about the problem of evil. These are the logical problem of evil and the probability problem of evil, which is sometimes referred to as the evidential problem of evil. These are the 2 that I'm going to be looking at tonight. So first off, the logical problem of evil. At its core, the logical problem of evil gives 3 facts that a theist, or someone who believes in the reality of a God, posits as true. and points out that these three facts are not compatible. These are that A, God is all-knowing, B, God is perfectly moral, and C, that evil exists in the world. To better introduce this argument and to give you an idea of where people are coming from, I'm going to show a video real quick of Frank Turek responding to a student's question at our Rosh Hashanah event here at UNL actually last spring.
Tell everyone here why her prayers went unanswered for 24 years.
God has not revealed that to me, so I don't know why, but I know why I don't know why.
Something that occurs on earth, God must want to happen and or allows to happen. You've heard this argument before from a hero of both of ours. His last name's Hitchens. Fraulein Feitzel, locked in a dungeon 24 years, raped most nights by her father, 7 children of sodomy. One of them died, perished. She prayed, she beseeched heaven. Why did heaven do nothing? She waited for 24 years, and yet her prayers weren't answered. Why? Tell everyone here why her prayers went unanswered for 24 years.
God has not revealed that to me, so I don't know why, but I know why I don't know why. I'm finite, God is infinite. And I sometimes marvel as to why God doesn't end my life. Because I do evil. You do evil. We all do evil. I don't know why God is patient with us. Can God bring good from evil? Sure he does.
Did God allow that to happen?
Sure he allowed it to happen. Yeah, he's God. But if he intervened every time we wanted to do evil, would we have free will?
He raped his daughter for 24 years and did nothing, Doc. Come on.
Nothing.
God
First
did
of all,
nothing.
again, this is a question from my worldview, but you have no grounds by which to say rape is wrong. Correct?
Are you serious? Forceful sexual assault? Yeah, that's wrong. Everyone here will agree with that, and I have no grounds.
How is it wrong if there's no God? Is it just your opinion?
No, it's everyone in this room's opinion.
So majority
Raise
vote.
your hand in this room if you want to get raped.
Cody, majority vote does not determine right.
No one. Zero
Otherwise, you
people.
have to say the Nazis were right in murdering Jews, homosexuals, gypsies, and Jehovah's Witnesses because they voted that way.
Systematic extermination of people based on their beliefs is incorrect as well, Doc, and you know that.
I know it, you know it too, you just have no way of justifying it.
Other than massacre and senseless extermination?
Again, Cody, you're stealing from God to argue against him. You have no standard from an atheistic worldview. You know in your heart what you're saying is true, that it's wrong to murder and rape people, but you have no way of justifying that other than your own personal opinion.
Dr. Turek, you don't have
If I gave you a book,
you would never dream of justifying rape and murder and torture. You would never dream of justifying
I don't justify it, and neither do you, but I just have a source to know why it's wrong, where you don't. Now, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian?
Faster than you probably would.
Well, so if I gave you...
If Christ descended from heaven...
He already has. If I were to give you a book, would you read it?
I would read it tomorrow and give you feedback by Friday.
It might take a little longer than that.
I've got 3 other books to read from now until then.
As long as you're open. If Christianity were true, you become a Christian, you said yes, so I'll give you a book. All right?
If I knew for a fact that Christianity was true, I'd be the first to bow down and worship on high, Doc. There's no question.
Beautiful.
You still haven't answered the question. You still have not answered the question. Why are women and men raped every day and God does nothing?
Okay, because
You can't answer that question.
Yes, I can. Let me answer it and we'll move on to Scott. Okay?
Thanks, Doc.
We have free will, and if God intervened every time we used our free will, this wouldn't be a moral universe. And we couldn't make choices gods. But Christ came into this world to save everybody from the evil that we perpetrate on one another, and it's a free gift that you can have, Cody. Why not take it?
So your answer is God refuses to stop rape, murder, and torture. That's your answer.
Sometimes he stops. Sometimes he refuses to stop it. Sometimes he does stop it, and you don't like it when he stops it.
I don't like it when he allows it.
Well, again, Cody, he has to allow freedom.
Rape,
Otherwise,
murder,
it's
and
not-
torture is
Yeah,
sanctioned by God. That's your
It's not
answer.
sanctioned, it's allowed, just like we, as human beings, allow our kids to do evil things because we can't corral them all the time, and if we did, they wouldn't be free creatures. But thank you for your question.
Thanks, Doc.
All right.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
God bless.
So unfortunately, by setting up tonight, I kind of noticed that me and Frank are matching a bit here. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I guess, is up to you to decide. But now I'm going to let you guys discuss for a few minutes. What do you think of the logical problem of evil as I've introduced it? Do you think Cody presented it well here? And do you think that Dr. Turek provided a good response to it? So you can go ahead and discuss that for a few minutes if you want. So first of all, I'd like to point out a few flaws with this dialogue that I think prevented it from having the positive and more constructive impact on viewers that it could have had. To start, it's in a public setting, which I think makes it harder to get into the real nuance of the discussion that a topic like this really deserves. But even putting that aside, after quickly attempting to make what is called the free will defense, which we will get into in a minute, Dr. Turek, instead of addressing Cody's argument, instead flips the problem back onto Cody and points out that he has no basis for even calling something right or wrong. While this may be a valid point, and one that would lead to a different productive discussion if given the right circumstances and setting, it derails the point of the conversation and does not address the issue that Cody brought up. Cody could have simply responded by saying, "It doesn't matter whether I think these actions are evil or not. The fact of the matter is that you admit they are wrong, yet you also posit that God is both all good and all-knowing, which seems to be a contradiction." This is what I believe Cody was getting at with his statement in the first place, before Frank redirected the question. So, this revised and more precise version of what essentially was Cody's argument leaves the theist in a tricky position, because it seems that these three facts cannot coexist, and the burden of proof is now on the theist to explain how these three facts can in fact coexist. Without addressing this argument and providing a response, it would leave a person to conclude that either God can't stop the evil, which would render him not all-powerful, he won't stop the evil, which would mean he is not perfectly moral. However, if we were able to make the case that all three of these facts can be true at the same time, we would have essentially debunked this argument. And who better to make such a case than everyone's favorite air conditioning expert, Alvin Plantinga. Now, if you don't know, Joel's shown this video before, but essentially this news station interviews Alvin Plantinga just about some random thing that's air conditioner, not knowing that he's a somewhat well-known figure. And in the comments, one of my favorite, the top comments under this video was the free chill defense, which, okay, whatever, not very funny. Anyways, along with being the world's expert on air conditioners, Alvin Plantinga is also perhaps the most influential theologian and Christian philosopher in the past century. He received a PhD from Yale in 1958 and was the professor of philosophy at Notre Dame University. So in a nutshell, Alvin Plantinga makes the argument that in order to give humans free will, the possibility of making immoral decisions must be present, or else it would not truly be free will. He also argues that a world with free will is more morally good than one without free will. Because while removing free will may remove the possibility of choosing evil, it would also remove the possibility of choosing good over evil. This would leave us in a situation where the only choice is the morally good one, and since it is the only choice, it would not be a morally good action, simply a morally neutral action, since it is the only option that one could take. So in essence, when creating our universe and our reality, God would have three options. He could either A, not create anything, B, create a world with no free will, where everyone must make the morally correct action, or C, create a world with free will, where people can either choose to do right or to do wrong, even though this means that evil would exist. And essentially what Alvin Plantinga is saying is making the argument that C is the most moral choice available. So what I'm going to do here is show a quick video kind of summarizing Alvin Plantinga's free will defense. We have to get it set up for online, that's why I have to wait a little bit here to play. Sorry about that.
The Center for Philosophy of Religion presents the free will defense. If God exists, God is perfectly good and all-powerful. But if God is so good, wouldn't he really want to prevent evil? And if God is so powerful, wouldn't he be able to do exactly what he really wants? Thoughts like these have led many to believe that it would be impossible for both God and evil to exist. But Alvin Plantinga has argued that they can coexist after all. Being all-powerful is impressive, but not even an omnipotent God can make a square with no corners or a rock too heavy for God to lift. Omnipotence gives God control over what is possible, not the power to do the impossible. Plantinga proposes that it is also impossible for God to ensure that we never use our freedom to bring about evil. But why? The answer depends on what is required for freedom. Part of what makes an action, say Jane's riding her bike, free, is that she is also able to do something else instead. If Jane is simply forced or caused by something else to ride her bike in a way that undermines her ability to do otherwise, then Jane's act isn't truly free. Accordingly, if God chooses to create a world with free creatures, he cannot guarantee that they always use their freedom in the right way. Any such guarantee would simply eliminate genuine freedom, and also eliminate all the value freedom brings into the world. On Plantinga's view, God is responsible for the existence of the beings that possess free will, and of their surroundings. But what comes of that gift of freedom is ultimately up to them, not God. At best, this shows only that God couldn't ensure that the world contained both free will and no evil. But couldn't God just create a world with neither instead? Perhaps the answer is that free will is a great good, a magnificent good. So incredibly good that the combination of free will together with the evil that accompanies it is more valuable than any world God could have created instead with no free creatures. Now, maybe that's not God's actual reason for permitting the kind of evil that arises from misusing freedom. And so we don't have what philosophers call a theodicy. We might not even be capable of knowing God's actual reason. Nevertheless, it is one possible explanation of how God and evil could both exist. And that's enough to serve as an adequate defense against that impossibility claim, Plantinga's free will defense. Still, we might wonder why God couldn't create only those people who would always freely do what is right. For Plantinga's answer to this surprisingly hard question, click here. To learn more about these ideas, please visit plantingavideos.com.
I'm going to give you guys a few minutes to discuss. And so what do you think of this free will defense? And what do you think could be some powerful counter-arguments or counterpoints to sort of go against it or to disprove it? So I'll give you a few minutes here. So one popular argument against the free will defense is done by asking the following question. Why can't God create a world in which everyone has free will but just chooses good? If he is all-powerful, couldn't he overcome this contradiction and simply put people in situations where even though they have the ability to do evil, they will never choose to? So in this hypothetical world, free will exists, but evil choices are never made. Shouldn't this be in God's ultimate power to be able to create such a world? Essentially, Alvin Plantinga's response to this brings up a concept called trans-world depravity. So in his response, he posits that though God has the power to give people free will, he does not have the power to control what they do with that free will. If this is the case, it may be possible that every person God would create in any circumstance he could possibly put them in, given their free will, would choose to do some form of evil at one point or another. This is what is known as trans-world depravity. By not permitting them to make such an evil choice, it would invalidate the reality of their free will in the first place, which would create a logical impossibility. This would create an unfree, free creature. If this is the case, then asking God to create a free will creature who will never choose evil would be similar in asking God to create a square circle or to make 2 + 2 = 5. So here's another quick video summarizing the response to this critique of the free will defense and explaining this concept of trans-world depravity.
The Center for Philosophy of Religion presents Trans-World Depravity. Letty has 3 boys she would like to treat with ice cream cones. She can serve the ice cream in the living room, kitchen, or the bedroom. It's possible that each boy eats his dessert with no problems, and that all 3 have a lovely time. That's what Letty would like. But whether that turns out to be what actually happens will be up to her boys in the end, and not to her. As it turns out, each boy is inclined toward naughtiness. Being placed in the living room will trigger a fight over who chooses what music to play. The kitchen will see a fuss over the last cookie in the jar. And occupying the top bunk will be the prize of a bedroom wrestling match. Even though the boys possess the ability to behave themselves, they won't. No matter where Letty puts them with their ice cream, each boy will do something or other that is wrong, and will do it freely too, since he had it in his power to do otherwise. When people hear that God could have created any number of different individuals and placed them in different possible scenarios, and given them a gift of free will, they ask, well, why didn't God just select those people who would always use their freedom in the right way? Why not choose to create just the ones that are able to act wrongly, but who won't, so long as they're in the right circumstances, which God could certainly provide? Alvin Plantinga has proposed an answer to this question. Perhaps, just like Letty, God isn't necessarily able to guarantee the outcome he most desires. Why? Because it is possible that every person who could be created suffers from what Plantinga calls trans-world depravity. Creating a free creature is up to God, but just how that gift of freedom is used is left up to the person who has it. It is possible that every person created in any possible setting is just like Letty's boys. If brought into being with the gift of free will, the person will, not must, but will use that freedom in the wrong way at least once. That would be a shame. It is possible everyone acts rightly, and yet they won't. Moreover, God can't force them to do so either. Not even an omnipotent being can do the impossible and permit freedom while always preventing its misuse, since freedom partially consists in not being thus manipulated. Still, the value of sharing an ice cream treat may be worth letting permitting a squabble over who chooses the music. Plantinga argues, securing the range of value that comes with free will may be a magnificent enough good for God to permit the evil resulting from its misuse. To learn more about these ideas, please visit plantingavideos.com.
So in summary, we've now created one possible world in which God is both perfectly moral, all-powerful, and where evil still exists. And by doing this, we have thus invalidated the initial logical problem of evil, which states that these three things cannot all be true. Something else I'd like to point out is that this is a possible explanation. I'm not positing that this is the correct or this is the current correct explanation that that is the world that we live in. But to essentially debunk this argument, all you would have to present is one possible explanation, which is what my goal was with that. But now this leads us into the second argument, which is the probability problem of evil. Since we are making an argument that God exists, then that must mean that we are living in the reality where God allows us to have free will, because that is the greatest morally good reality he could have created. If he chose to place us in a reality that is less morally good than another possible reality he could have created us in, then he would be purposefully allowing more evil than is necessary to accomplish that goal. However, how probable is it that it is the case that we are living in such a perfect world? Basically, the atheist would like to present two options and ask the theist to answer which one is most likely. Is it more likely that God exists and that we are living in a world where he gave us free will? Or is it more likely that he simply doesn't exist? And this is the explanation for the evil in the world. So while the logical problem of evil can be answered by simply providing a possible world in which God and evil can coexist, the theist is now being asked if this is truly the world that we are living in. Or is it more probable that God simply doesn't exist, which would be the simpler and more reasonable conclusion. This is an example of the concept of Occam's razor, which is that the explanation of the facts that is the most simple and requires the least defense is often the correct explanation. To illustrate this point, here's an example that I've heard used before, although I'm not sure where it originally came from. So let's say that you move to Metropolis for a new job, and you hear from all the citizens that Superman lives in that city. That would probably make you feel very safe and secure, knowing that if you were ever in danger or a crime was going to be committed, Superman would simply come to stop it. However, after living there for 5 years, you never once see Superman, and you still hear about crimes being committed on a daily basis. Is it more likely that Superman exists and just is choosing not to intervene in these crimes? Or would it be safer to assume that perhaps the citizens of this city have been duped, and that Superman does not live there after all? This is similar to the argument someone could make against theism with the probability problem of evil. They are saying that it just seems more likely that there is no God at all, rather than that God exists and just chooses to allow this much evil to happen. However, this would be my response to such an argument. As my fellow Russia Christian members have pointed out in previous weeks, there are many other reasons for believing that God exists. So we cannot go off of the existence of evil as the only evidence to evaluate when making our decision. We also have to take into account the teleological argument for God, the moral argument for God, so on and so forth. In relation to the Superman example, this would be like saying not only does everyone say Superman exists, but people have seen him, other people have seen him, taken pictures of him, and he appears on TV. There's more evidence in the affirmative for his existence than there is in the negative, which is the fact that some crimes still exist in the city. However, putting all that aside, putting those third-party examples and evidences for God to the side, we are still faced with a conundrum. It would seem to follow that if God could create any world with free will, he would create the one with the most good and the least evil. We have explained why evil must exist for free will to exist, But why does it seem that perhaps the balance is off, and senseless and purposeless evil happens so often? Would it really affect our free will if God could stop just one more forest fire, or prevent one senseless street murder? It does not seem like we are living in this best possible world. So this can't be the world that God created, and it is more likely that it is a world that God did not create and that God does not exist in. I think the best response to this objection is to simply point to our finite knowledge. Obviously, as human beings, it is impossible for us to know of every possible world that God could have created. And it is impossible for us to know the butterfly effect of every action and every event throughout our universe's entire history. While we can certainly speculate that there could be more morally good worlds than the one we live in, ultimately we can never know if that is the case or not. And if we believe God exists, it follows that we must live in his best possible world, or else he would not be morally perfect, as we've stated before. If we start with the premise that God exists, which we would get from those other arguments that I mentioned, it would logically follow that he would create the most moral reality possible, which would be the one that we currently inhabit. So here's a video summarizing that probability problem of evil that I've gone over, and then after that I will have a few more closing statements.
In part one, we looked at the logical version of the problem of suffering and evil. This argument attempts to show that since suffering and evil exist, it is logically impossible for God to exist. And we explained why even atheist philosophers admit that this argument fails. But wait, it may still be argued that while it's logically possible that God and suffering both exist, is far from likely. There's just so much pointless suffering, it seems improbable that God would have good reasons for permitting it. This is the probability version of the problem. Suffering provides empirical evidence that God's existence is not impossible, just highly unlikely. Is this a good argument? Consider 3 points. First, we are not in a position to say with any confidence that God probably lacks reasons for allowing the suffering in the world. The problem is that we're limited in space and time, and in intelligence and insight. God, on the other hand, sees every detail of history from beginning to end, and orders it through people's free decisions and actions. In order to achieve his purposes, God may have to allow a great deal of suffering along the way. Suffering which appears pointless within our limited scope of understanding may be seen to have been justly permitted by God within his wider framework. Sometimes, what we experience makes no sense until we gain a wider perspective and see the big picture designed by the Creator. Here is the second point. Relative to the full scope of the evidence, God's existence may well be probable. You see, probabilities are always relative to background information. For example, if we consider only how much this man weighs, we would say it's highly improbable that he's a world-class athlete. But when we're willing to consider new information, that he's a professional sumo wrestler and a world champion, we quickly revise our view. In the same way, when the atheist claims that God's existence is improbable, we should ask, improbable relative to what background information? If we consider only the suffering in the world, then God's existence may very well appear to be improbable. But if we're willing to look at the full scope of background information, to take into account the powerful arguments for God's existence, we may come to a very different conclusion. The third point is, Christianity entails doctrines that increase the probability of the coexistence of God and suffering. Consider 4 of these. First, the chief purpose of life is not happiness. People often assume that if God exists, his role is to create a comfortable environment for his human pets. They think the ultimate goal of our lives on earth is happiness, and therefore God is obligated to keep us happy. However, Christianity presents a radically different view, that the purpose of life is to know God. This alone brings true, lasting fulfillment. Suffering can bring about a deeper, more intimate knowledge of God, either on the part of the one who is suffering or those around him. The whole point of human history is that God, having given us free will, is drawing as many people as he can into his unending kingdom. Suffering is one of the ways God can draw people freely to himself. In fact, countries that have endured the most hardship often show the highest growth rates for Christianity.
God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our consciences, but shouts in our pains. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world.
Second, mankind is in a state of rebellion against God and his purpose. Terrible human evils are testimony to man's depravity, a consequence of his alienation from God. The Christian isn't surprised at moral evil in the world. On the contrary, he expects it. The third doctrine states that God's purpose is not restricted to this life, but spills over beyond the grave into eternal life. This world is just the beginning, the entryway to an unimaginable, never-ending life beyond death's door. Paul, who wrote much of the New Testament, underwent afflictions, hardships, calamities, beatings, imprisonments, hunger. Yet he wrote, "We do not lose heart, for this slight momentary affliction is preparing us for an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison, because we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal." Paul understood that life on earth and whatever suffering it holds for each of us is temporary. Our pain will not endure forever, but our lives with God will. Paul was not belittling the plight of those who suffer horribly in this life. Indeed, he was one of them. But he saw that those suffering will be overwhelmed forever by the ocean of joy that God will give to those who will freely receive it. And the fourth doctrine is this: the knowledge of God is an incomparable good. Knowing God is the ultimate fulfillment of human existence, an infinite good. Thus, the person who knows God, no matter how much he has suffered, can still say, "God is good to me." So, if Christianity is true, it's not at all improbable that suffering and evil should exist. In summary, for all these reasons, the probability version of the problem of evil is no more successful than the logical version. As a purely intellectual problem, then, the problem of evil does not disprove God's existence. But even if those intellectual arguments fail, the emotional problem of suffering and evil remains very powerful. If you have suffered deeply, or if you've watched someone you love go through intense pain, you may be thinking, so what if God exists? Why would I want to respond to him or worship him? I feel cold and empty. I want nothing to do with him. You're not alone. God knows your name. He knows who you are and what you're going through. God promises to be with you through your suffering. He could give you the strength to endure. Jesus Christ also suffered. Although he was innocent, he was tortured and sentenced to death. His suffering had a purpose: to provide you and me with a life-giving connection to God. Not only does God exist, but he loves you. He seeks after you. He offers you hope. And in time, he will make all things new.
He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning, crying, pain, for the old order of things has passed away.
I'll give you guys a few minutes to discuss this as well, to talk over the probability problem of evil and its responses. So go ahead. So I'd like to close by saying that, and similar to the ending of that last video that you just watched, I by no means wish to demean or belittle anyone's experience with evil in this world, and simply, chalk it up to, well, it was just meant to be, and that God has a plan. I feel this displays a severe lack of empathy. We will never reach people with the gospel of Christ if we treat them in this way. I would implore you to be kind and gracious to others, and to really listen to them when they describe their frustrations with God and the evil that they have experienced, and to address it with both gentleness and respect. This is often a problem that we can't immediately be explained away and solved with logical reasoning, and must be dealt with at an emotional and human level first. It can be easy to fall into the trap of getting too defensive and be unwilling to give any ground, but I think this is one of the issues we need to avoid that on. It can be very helpful to level with people and express to them that sin and evil is a terrible thing and can be devastating to people to have to deal with. It is for this reason that I think this issue is so important and can be so impactful to so many people. That's all I had, so thank you for your time. If anyone has any questions, I guess now you could ask, or anything from online. And if not, obviously feel free to stay around and continue some of these discussions with people around you about this. So. Sure.
Sorry, I just walked in right as you were wrapping up the free will bit.
Sure.
But I think this has something that's tied into it, like with the last video says, how God causes certain things to happen that
Sure.
help draw people really close to Him.
Sure.
But that's, I think there's for people to say that's what God causing things to happen to draw people close to Him. How would you relate, like the God interfered, I suppose.
Sure.
Normal life and people being really drawn to Him.
Sure. Yeah, so I guess you're kind of getting at this idea of how much intervention would be too much, and if you were to, and that's kind of, that's what we were talking about a little bit before that with this idea of free will, where if God were to step in and stop evil wherever it would happen, then it would no longer be free will. Then even though He would have the power to do so, if His intention in essence, or in the beginning, is to create free will creatures, once He would make that decision, going back, and it would invalidate the original intention of what He was doing. So, yeah. Alrighty, well, if there's nothing else, thanks you guys for your time, and feel free to stick around. I'll still be here for quite a while, and then just talk with each other. So thanks, have a good night.